It was always spoken of good and evil, light and darkness, creation and destruction. In this world, these were two incompatible concepts that had been in constant conflict. The Minotaur represented evil, and the angel represented good. The angel defeated the Minotaur, and at the end of this story, light always prevails. Thus 300 years had passed since the Great Divine War, and the surface thrived more than ever. However, little by little, the world was forgetting them. There was a statue of an angel in the middle of the city. Now one could no longer find the awe and admiration that people once had for them. And so it was how they concluded after a long time of consideration that they could no longer continue like this. Herchkria's eyes began to shine, and a smile appeared on his face, revealing that they needed darkness, as the darkness made them shine more intensely. He was sitting on top of the roof. In front of him sat Karam with her arms wrapped around her knees. According to her, this was a stupid reason. With a serene expression, she began to think silently. According to Herchkria, if she took over her owner's body and lost control, they were going to stop her and become the saviors. His eyes began to shine with joy, and with a smile, he mentioned that he was happy she had understood him. But just then, she moved quickly and attacked Herchkria in the face, leaving him in shock without knowing what had just happened. Karam was furious. Using her claws, she attacked the angel in the face and with an expression full of hatred said that it was enough. The angel's body began to fall toward the ground, but he kept smiling. For him, this was a sorrow. And then his body started to disappear. His body transformed into feathers, and a powerful energy began to gather in the sky. He had thought that the fate of a demonic sword was to take over its owner's body, questioning whether she had perhaps changed her mind. These words made Karam angry. Despite being furious, she began to show a smile, explaining that it was they who had defined them as evil, so now they should solve their own problems and not think about depending on others. Herchkria manifested in the sky, rested his face on his hand, and with a smile thought it was a shame that she thought that way. He had believed he could reason with her and Eru. For him it was a pleasure to meet her and he decided it was time to withdraw. Karam's eyes filled with rage. She began to stare at him intently with a piercing gaze in silence. Herchkria's body disappeared into the air, transforming into white feathers, her gaze fixed on the feathers. She was furious and confused as she did not know what Eru had done. Inside Boris's laboratory, he prepared some tea, sat in front of the table, started pointing at the cup of tea with his hand, and with a kind smile mentioned that it was high-quality black tea from Spania. He didn't know if Cyan would like it. Cyan remained calm and with a tranquil expression asked why he was so interested in him. Boris began to laugh, extended his hands, and replied that it was natural for an instructor to be interested in talent. Cyan's gaze filled with confusion. He started observing Boris and explained that he didn't even attend most of the classes. Showing a smile, Boris asked for the reason, and Cyan decided to be honest, responding that there wasn't much to learn. The aura in the atmosphere became tense when Boris closed his eyes and asked if the Dean and the Duke were aware of this. With a penetrating and suspicious gaze, Cyan asked him to get straight to the point. Boris opened his eyes and with a calm expression decided to get straight to it. He wanted to know if they had known each other before. Cyan became serious, and his suspicions increased. He didn't know why Boris thought this. Boris began recalling when Cyan had appeared and had taken the princess's hand, showing a murderous look. Cyan's eyes at that time were full of hatred toward him, and Boris had felt certain hostility, especially in Cyan's gaze, which had been so intense it almost seemed like murderous intent. A smile spread across Boris's face, and he extended his hand. It was the first time he had seen Cyan. And because of this, he wondered if Cyan already knew him from before. Our boy began stirring the tea with the spoon, rested his head on his fist, and with a lost gaze replied no. For him too, it was surprising to have never heard about him before, mentioning that a mage with an 8th grade mana circle should be famous everywhere. Boris's expression changed. With a suspicious gaze, he replied that he preferred a quiet life. Cyan became even more suspicious and asked penetratingly where Boris was from, to which he responded that he came from a very rural area, so there was no way Cyan could know about it. The tension in the atmosphere grew, and Cyan realized that Boris was lying. Our boy who was mixing the tea began to observe Boris in silence. He was sure that he didn't want to tell anyone. Even in his past life, he had tried to hide it until the end. He broke the tension by asking if there was anything else Boris wanted to know about him. Boris started showing a cheerful smile. It was already late and they could always talk later. Cyan left the laboratory, which now had a broken window, with moonlight illuminating the interior. For Boris, Cyan was someone cold, so much so that he almost hadn't known what to say. Boris returned the book to the altar and began to observe it in silence. Now he knew why Ashel had felt threatened by Cyan. realizing that he was the one helping Eren. He placed his hand on top of the book, and a white feather appeared. For him, it was a disgrace that the younger brother of the savior who had been blessed by Lumendal was the bearer of a demonic sword. Herchkria manifested behind him, began to observe him, and with a smile mentioned that it must be a matter of destiny. Boris took the book from the altar, opened it, and while flipping through its pages, started to show a smile. For him this was an interesting way of seeing things. Herchkria turned around and with a calm expression revealed that he was the owner of Karam, and perhaps Cyan was the darkness they had been searching for all this time. Boris reached the page where the sun was, placing his hand on the sun. He thought that if Herchkria was right, Cyan would help them make Ashel shine much brighter, just as he prophesied, the black mist that hid the sun. He closed the book and his eyes began to shine with joy, revealing that the reascension of the Savior was about to begin. Somewhere else, someone came out of a portal and entered a place with fog. It was Karam. She entered the kingdom of Eru using the portal and began to gaze at the ground, creating tension. In front of her was Eru sitting on his throne, his attention fixed on her. He did not expect that she had come to see him, asking what brought her here. Karam rested her hand on her waist and with an excited smile began to walk toward him. She didn't know if he was asking this because he truly didn't know, revealing that she had just met Herchkria and didn't know he was so close to them. Eru's eyes filled with suspicion, with a curious expression. He asked if he had tried to do something. Karam's eyes widened in rage. She clenched her teeth upon seeing that he already knew this. She was furious since she didn't understand why he wasn't doing anything, questioning whether perhaps he had forgotten that they were the ones who had expelled him. Eru turned into mist and appeared behind her. With a sad voice, he revealed that there was no place lower than the one where he had already fallen, which meant there was nothing left to fear. Upon feeling Eru's presence, her attention fixed on him, she was somewhat surprised and confused at the same time. Consumed by rage, she turned around and with a desperate gaze revealed that those guys were trying to use Cyan and her. Eru turned his back to her, questioning if this was the wish she had. Karam's expression changed. With a curious gaze, she asked what he was talking about. Eru used his power and made a mist card appear made of red mana. Using his finger, he began to write. Better than anyone else, he knew that her wish was to protect Cyan, so he decided to make that wish come true. After writing on the card, he began to stare at her intently, handed it to her, and asked her to carry this decree with her. With this, all of Mist was going to help her and Cyan. With a cold expression, she took the card in hand, and with a gaze full of rage realized that Eru was not going to do anything himself, questioning if something had happened with Lumendal. Eru's eyes began to shine. Every decision he had made had been for his daughter's sake. She turned her back on him and couldn't help but clench her teeth. She didn't want to hear his pathetic excuses. Consumed by hatred, she prepared to enter the portal. Pointing at Eru with her finger, she called him a coward and suggested he stay locked up like that forever. He stood watching in silence and couldn't help but feel depressed, knowing that she was so harsh. In the city, where the angel statue was, several women hooded in white gathered. In front of them was a woman holding a sword and before her stood a knight. The room was full of statues of angels, and there were women with white hair hooded, forming a line. The leader of them intended to bless the knight for acting as a proxy of the great god of light, Lumendal, as the worthy savior. She asked if the knight intended to become a ray of light to save this world from cruel darkness. She gripped the sword tightly and asked if the knight swore to be on the front line to fight and die on the battlefield. The knight who had blue hair remained thinking in silence. It was Alice Vert. With a determined gaze she swore to accept the will of the god of light, Lumendal. Her eyes began to shine. She stood firm in her decision, but she did not know if this was truly the right path to follow. Recently, the Empire had been incorporating talented individuals into the Knights of Light and sending them to the front. And for this reason, even during disasters like the Blood Banquet, there was nothing that the Royal Guard could do. She stood up and her attention fixed on the statue. It had been an old dream of hers to join the Knights of Light, but she did not know if this was what she should protect on the front lines. While she was lost in her thoughts, someone caught her attention, congratulating her. Alice's eyes widened in surprise. Consumed by curiosity, she turned around. She couldn't help but feel happy and smile upon seeing that it was her friend Cecilia. Cecilia began to show a proud smile upon seeing that her friend had finally achieved her dreams. Alice became nervous, started waving her hands in denial. She had to call her friend Lady Cecilia from now on since she was only a novice knight. Cecilia, who had her hands resting on her abdomen, said that Alice could address her as usual when the two of them were alone. Alice knelt before her as a form of respect and refused since she was her superior. Seeing this, Cecilia couldn't help but get nervous and panic. They went to a park where there was a beautiful water fountain, and Alice explained the reason why she was worried. Both sat on the bench in front of the fountain, and Cecilia mentioned that she could never choose a wrong path. She was sure of it, as they had known each other for a long time. Alice, who had her eyes closed, sighed as she was still in conflict. With a lost gaze, she revealed that she could still hear the screams of people asking for help. With a serious expression, Cecilia explained that there was only one way to find out if the front lines were where she belonged. Alice's mind filled with confusion and curiosity, Cecilia stood up and with a smile suggested to her to join her when she went to the front line. Her eyes began to shine with happiness, as Duke Villiers had entrusted them with an important mission to fulfill. This was Alice's first official task. Upon hearing this, Alice couldn't help but be somewhat surprised and in shock, since she couldn't believe that her father had given them a mission. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part, then don't forget to subscribe and like the video.